speak? Yep, we still have audio. Excellent. We're going to start then, I believe. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Norm Ellis. This is the Adult One Bible Study at Grace Baptist Church in beautiful Vancouver, Washington. And we are in the middle of a monsoon time, but that's okay. We like rain out here.
Yeah.
Glad to have you with us online and here in the classroom. And today, we're finishing up on our unit in Exodus and Leviticus. And today's is called Holy Living. Holy Living. And we'll be in Leviticus chapter 26. And we're going to be looking at these 3 points. Faithfulness, verses 1 through 2 of that same chapter. Blessings, verses 3 through 8. And fellowship, 9 through 13. So like I said, Leviticus 26. And the main point is God blesses His people when they pursue holiness. And I think this is probably something that our church today needs to think about and talk about, because we've kind of regulated holiness to the side sometimes, it seems like. But that's just my opinion. Anyway, let's have a word of prayer and we'll jump right into our study today.
Hi, Norm.
Come on.
This is Denise.
Hi.
This is Brianna's mom.
Oh, glad to have you with us.
Norm is the leader.
Have a
and
seat.
Sharon.
Okay.
And I
Sharon
totally gapped
and
on your
Steve.
name.
He was behind you.
Denise. Norm. Glad to have you with us.
I'd like to
Have
And your
a
name
seat.
again? Denise. It's very nice to meet you. And you're Sharon. Okay,
I
cool.
know they've been here for a while. I talked
See.
to both of them.
Now, who did
She goes,
she
"That's
say
Katrina."
is-
Okay.
Brianna. Oh,
So,
Brianna.
I'm glad I'm not the only one.
We'll give you these notes. This is a color copy in the
I
back,
think I
so
got about,
I only have limited color, but that one's for you if you'd like.
29 now. So I got
All
like
right.
3 years on you.
No, I'm off on that.
No, everybody's 29.
All right. So I was in the middle of doing our presentation because we do live streaming. I don't know if you knew that or not.
Nope.
So the camera is on me primarily.
Okay.
But your voice can be heard if you ask questions and stuff like that. And I'm glad to have you with us today.
Okay.
I was about to open with a word of prayer, so I think we should do that. Let's have a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this time we have to study your word and to finish up this section of Exodus and Leviticus. And Lord, we look forward to our new study in 1st and 2nd Peter and Jude. And just thank you for the people that are here today, and for those that are at home watching, and for those that are on their way here, keep them safe as they're traveling. And for those that are sick and away from us and traveling, just pray to be with them as well and help them to get better if they're sick. Thank you so much, and just look forward to this time of studying your word. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, well, glad to have you with us, Denise. And we are pretty informal here, so if you have a question, just say so. But we're going to be talking about holy living, and we're in session number 13 of our study course book, which I'll give you a copy right here if you want. You can follow along if you feel like it. We don't go word for word or anything like that, but it's a good guide for us.
Okay.
And we're on, I forgot to put the page number. Oh, bad me. Starts on page 118. So if you are following along, it's page 118. There we go. That starts the session. And again, we are in the last session today. And next week we do have our beginning of a new one. And I think I gave you one. Do you think you'll be with us again next week, perhaps?
Yes, I will.
I'm going to give you a copy of our new unit. We're being 1st and 2nd Peter and Jude, starting next Sunday. So you just made the last part of the Leviticus part we're doing. Where was I? Oh, okay, yeah, question for you. This is our introduction time. We kind of talk about something to get us thinking about what we're going to be studying, and perhaps sometimes it's a little strange, sometimes it's off the wall, but it always is interesting. So when you think about traffic signs, what are some of the shapes, some of the colors of a typical traffic sign? And then you can't Google this. You can't after when I finish this part.
Octagon for a stop.
Octagon, yeah.
With white trim.
So it has white trim? Might have white
Some
trim.
of them do.
Some might be do. Anyway, but it's mainly, of course, what color?
Red.
Red. Red means what? Danger,
Yeah.
right? So it's kind of important, right? What are some other signs?
Triangle for yield.
A triangle, yeah, for yield, and usually it's another color. Yellow, I think.
Yellow.
Yeah, to warn you. It's not quite as severe, perhaps, as a red one, but it's a warning. There's probably what's any other sign you can think of? Maybe a traffic sign.
Speed limit sign.
Speed limit sign. And they're usually what color?
white for posted with black lettering
Right.
and yellow with black lettering for recommended.
Advisories, like going
Yeah.
around corners, and
Yeah.
perhaps you might want to slow down from 45 to 35, those kind of signs. And by the way, they don't necessarily hold the same weight. That's up to the discretion of the officer if he sees you going around the corner a little faster when the caution says, because, whatever. But there's a lot of signs, okay?
It was amazing to me that they were all thought of in Wisconsin and Indiana, in Minnesota.
You're jumping ahead of me.
No, that's all in that paragraph.
I know, you're right. Thank you very much. That's right. But is there? We kind of talked about those already. Is there an order of importance? Is one more important, really important than maybe another, or something like that? Well, they kind of are, because I talked about I gave you a hint
Yeah,
for the
but
colors, right?
If you get
Yeah.
one wrong on your
Stop.
driving test,
Well, that's true,
they're
too.
both there.
But if you don't stop, you might get hit, right? Whereas if you don't go what the posted speed limit says, you might not necessarily get injured or hurt. You might not, But there's some order because of severity of what the sign is trying to tell us, right? Trying to communicate those kind of things. Now to back to where you said, in our handouts, and by the way, our handouts, I'm going to tell people online, you can get a copy of those by contacting our pastor, Pastor Matthew, and he'll be glad to put you on the email list so you can get these every week. But our handouts here, the first one is called the intro paragraph. And I'm going to read that for us. It says, road signs, and this is what Sharon just shared with us here. We probably think about them right after we notice the blue light coming on behind us. But where does it come from? Well, back in the 1920s, and I didn't realize this either, like you said, representatives from Wisconsin, Indiana, and Minnesota, they developed the first uniform stop signs. Interesting. So the round signs were for railroad crossings. The octagons meant stop. Diamonds, or I think triangle you said, also. No, that's something else.
Yields.
Diamonds signified curves coming ahead. That's what it was. Speed signs were rectangular, and yield signs, there we go, triangular, right? Today, colors, shapes, and sizes of road signs are standardized across our nation, not across the world necessarily. So when you go to some other country, I went to England one time as part of the Air Force, and they had some strange signs over there. Different colors, But that's the way they do it. People are used to it, right? But these signs are constant reminders of what we should and shouldn't do while driving. So what would be the primary purpose of a traffic sign? What do you think? I'm going to sit down.
Give you safe guidance.
Keep you safe, right? I like that word safe. Any other ideas you think there?
Well, it's to say that in this area, the rules are these.
Yeah.
Everybody should be following these rules.
Yeah.
Through that particular
Maybe
area.
it's going 55 miles an hour, or something like that. Right, exactly.
I don't know if speed limits are a good.
Speed what?
I don't think, no, if speed limits are a good example, well, unless you're in a residential
Well,
area.
I mean,
Then you-
in this area, let's say, it's going to be the speed. That's what I meant.
Yeah, okay.
Went to Canada and we got shoved through a subdivision.
Uh-huh.
And they had a square diamond shaped sign.
Right.
And it had a line through it and a little bump on it.
Oh, yeah?
And it's up, and then some squiggly lines after it. And we couldn't figure out what the heck that was.
Speed bumps.
It was a speed bump.
So when you hit a speed bump, you're going to be wiggling a lot.
But when you initially looked at it,
Uh-huh.
it looked like slug crossing.
There are some strange signs out there, aren't there? But the primary purpose of the traffic signs will pretty much keep you safe. Maybe give you direction, right? It says maybe, turn left for I-5, and you got to get up to Seattle, and you miss that sign, you're not going to Seattle quickly. So it's important because otherwise you have to deviate, lose time, right? There's other reasons for the signs, but there's a lot of those kind of things. So which signs can cause you the most difficulty if you ignore or disobey them?
Stop signs.
Stop signs probably, yeah. There's other signs too. We're going to look at something here in a moment. But I think we all agree it says that traffic signs are intended to keep us and others safe, right? So if you look at your handout, the last page, it's in color for you guys. For those of you online, if you got my handouts, it should look like this. Anyway, this is a sampling of some U.S. signs. And, there's a lot of them here. And this is just a sampling. This is not all of them, but do not enter. If you enter where it says do not enter, what could happen to you?
Crunch.
Crap. Yeah, you get involved in an accident, right? I didn't find this sign. I should have found it, put it on there, but like bridge out, that would be another really, really good sign to obey.
One way.
One way, yes, one way. I like.
And it's awful to get in the one way the wrong direction.
Signs where they're doing construction work and it's narrowed down to one lane instead of two or
yes,
three.
very good. Yeah, that's do not change lanes and things like that. This one sign that is common in the last, I don't know, 30 years. I hadn't seen it before that when I was younger. I know that limited sight distance. What the heck does that mean? You know, it's almost a little mystified unless you were trained on what it means. It just means there's some hills and stuff, and you might not see the car coming up over the hill. That's all it means, but it's kind of an odd sign. Another interesting sign that I couldn't resist this one, is in the bottom, middle. What is that? Mama Duck?
Yeah, I've seen that one.
I have seen that one. That's a real sign, by the way. It's basically saying, slow down,
Yeah.
be careful. There's marshy areas around here, perhaps. There may be a duck coming across with its ducklings. And that's an interesting sign, too. Another one.
I wonder if other areas have turtles crossing.
I actually have, I think that they have turtles. I think I've seen alligators. And of course, deer crossing signs.
I've seen the deer crossing.
Yeah, those are all advisory signs, you know. One place I noticed when I was younger, growing up, was in an area on Highway 16. I lived in Port Orchard, Washington, which is near Bremerton on the Kitsap Peninsula. And there's a little town called Purdy. And this town has a women's prison there. And there were signs on Highway 16, like this bottom left one. Do not pick up hitchhikers. Apparently, they would walk away occasionally and get a ride away on hitchhikers. So they had to put that sign up too. You probably heard that before, right?
I've never seen that one.
Oh, I've seen it before. Yeah.
I've gone up through.
Uh-huh.
What is it? No. North towards Squeam. There's a Shelton.
Shelton, yeah.
Yeah.
Shelton is a big prison. It's kind of a transition. I used to work in the prison, at a prison out here in up in the mountains near Yakult. It was a
Larch Mountain.
Larch Mountain, yeah. I was in a business office, and I wasn't a resident. I was in the business office, and we sent people to Shelton all the time, and people came to us from Shelton. It was like a way place.
Yeah.
They would, you initially go to Shelton and be processed, then sent to Monroe, or sent to Walla Walla, or sent to Larch, or sent to wherever it was. It was a kind of a way station for prisoners in the Department of Corrections system. Anyway, all that to say, there's a lot of signs, right?
Yeah.
And if you're thinking you're on I-5, but the sign says 95, you got problems, right? So you watch for the signs. There's another interesting one. Low-flying aircraft. Have you ever seen that sign before?
Yeah.
And it will unnerve you around these small fields to be going along this road, and suddenly, right over your head, it feels like a little Cessna plane goes.
Yeah.
So I can see why they would do that as well. Anyway, signs are important. That's the upshot, right? I think I have this up here. No, I don't have it up here. Well, bad me. I thought I had the 10 Commandments posted here. Well, I do no, I don't there either. Well, we had a poster for the 10 Commandments, and I must have took it down because we didn't need it at the time. But anyway, okay, everyone knows what the 10 Commandments are, right? I don't have it listed here. Darn. Bad teacher. The 10 Commandments are basically the signs that God gave Israel, right? And we should look at that information again. So let's look that up really quick here. That would be in Leviticus. Somebody find it for me and start reading if you want. Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Deuteronomy.
First one is thou shalt have no other gods before me.
Well, yeah, that's true. Okay, go ahead and read them off then.
Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image.
Okay.
Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain.
Right.
Remember the Sabbath to keep it holy.
Mm-hmm.
Honor thy father and mother.
I can't believe I didn't.
Thou shalt not murder.
Uh-huh.
Thou shalt not commit adultery. And thou shalt not steal.
Okay. So that sums it up, right? And if you look at them, the first half deal with our relationship upwards with God, right? And the second part of it, I can't remember where the dividing line is, it deals with our relationship horizontally with other people, doesn't it? Is anybody in here cold?
No,
I'm getting warm.
I'm warm.
Yeah.
I'm cranking this down. Oh, it's all the way up. Let's put it all the way down there. Because by the time we get done, it'll be fine. So those are the warning signs, the caution signs, the whatever signs you want to call it, that God gave Israel. Okay, so they said, well, okay, what are some of the things we need to do? And God gave them these signs, if you will, for their life and how they were to live. Now, what was the purpose of those commandments? Do you know what the purpose was?
Kind of keep them out of trouble.
Okay,
I mean, they're
right. To help
guidance.
them. Yeah, to help them to be what? I guess the word. I guess I'm trying to
Supposed to be
say.
holy.
Oh, there we go.
But
To be holy, right? Leviticus is talking about that a lot. In Leviticus, like the main verse in Leviticus, here it is, that you want to focus on for the whole book, if you will, is Leviticus 20:26 says, I am the Lord, the holy God. You have been chosen to be my people, so you must be holy too. So we are to be holy because God is holy as his people, right? And what does it mean? What does it mean to be holy? Let's define our terms a little bit here.
you can try.
You can try? Try to be holy?
Try to be holy.
Oh, try to define. We can do better than try to define it, though. Page 2 of handout number 1, which is the second page. The definition of holy. Some of the things I wrote down here is, it means to be holy is to be set apart, to be perfect, or strive to be perfect, pure, transcendent. Holiness causes fearful awe. It evokes adoration and reverence. The Hebrew word for holy is Kodesh, which means apartness, set apart, separateness, sacredness, otherness, transcendent, and totally other. God is totally above his creation and his creatures, including us. Holy has the idea of heaviness or weight of glory also. It says in the New Testament, the word for holy is hagios, which means set apart, reverend, sacred, and worthy of veneration or worship. Holy applies to God because God himself is totally other. He's separate, sacred, transcendent, reverend, and set apart from every created thing. So when we are called upon to be holy, how can we be that way? Can we totally be holy, first of all? Somebody said, I think you already said that, didn't you? You said we can't, right? But does that mean we don't try?
No, I said we can try.
There you go.
Right.
We are to be holy. We are to be separate to the Lord. That doesn't mean we ignore other people in this world. I don't mean that at all. But it means in our worship, we remember who he is. Who is he? He's the creator of all things, right? And he is outside of time and space. We are a created being. We are within time and space. And so when we worship him, we got to remember that's who he is, right? And so that's part of understanding what it means to live holy, would be to live for God. If I were to put it in a simple way, it'd be to live for God. Does that make sense? I hope it does.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what we're talking about a little bit here in these this lesson, this particular study.
You've got this section down below, take time to be holy, take time to speak with God.
You saw that, yeah. If we have time, we'll go over that one. But that's good though. I'm glad you brought it up. But it's a hymn in our hymnal. We don't do it very often. But it's called "Take Time to Be Holy," and we can talk about it right now, just to briefly touch on it. A lot of the hymns teach us certain aspects of the Christian life, right?
Oh.
And one of them is being holy, and this one talks about that. It says, "Take time to be holy, speak oft with thy Lord, abide or live in him always, and feed on his word. Make friends of God's children, help those who are weak, forgetting in nothing his blessings to seek." And so these verses all talk about that aspect of different aspects of what it means to be holy, right? If I could remember how it goes exactly. Take time to be holy, be calm in thy soul. Each thought and each motive beneath his control. Thus led by his Spirit to fountains of love, thou soon shalt be fitted for service above. That's how it goes. I remember now. That was verse 4, by the way. Interesting. I love that some of these old hymns, they teach us a lot of things, right? I love the choruses as well. But sometimes we ignore the hymns because, well, they're just not hip. You know, they're not today. You know, well, there's a lot of good things to learn from both, isn't there?
Yeah.
I think, especially, I love some of the praise choruses. Oh, I just love those.
Some of them are almost like a sermon in themselves. Some songs.
Yes, you're right. Anyway, so where are the Israelites still in our thing here? They are still camped around Mount Sinai, which is in this part of the Sinai Peninsula, right here. I think I enclosed a copy of this in your handouts, if you want to have it. This is for you to keep, if you want. Mine's in color. Yours is in black and white. Sorry about that. But so it shows that same area. So they left Egypt and they went across the Red Sea and they went all the way down here to Mount Sinai, and they've been worshiping God, receiving the Ten Commandments, receiving instructions from God and Moses, and setting up the priesthood with Aaron and his sons and the Levites. So they've been doing all this, and now they're about done. This is the last part before they go out from Mount Sinai and begin their trek to the Promised Land. Now we know what happens when they get to the Promised Land. What happens? They send out spies, and the spies come back and say, "Oh, there's big people in the land. There's giants. We're like grasshoppers at your sight. We can't do anything." And of course, you know, that's not what God said. God said, "I'll be with you, and I'll conquer the land so you can get back to your home area." And so they said, "No, we can't do that." So they disobeyed God. So they ended up doing what? Wandering in this area
40 years.
for 40 years. Okay, and then after that generation had died off, the next generation came up. They were faithful to God. They said, "We'll follow you. We'll go in and take the land like you said." And they did. They went in and took back the Promised Land. So I'm giving you a thumbnail sketch of what happens afterwards because we're not going to be doing that. We're going into 1st and 2nd Peter. And so I just wanted to give you what Paul Harvey used to call the rest of the story.
Yeah.
So,
That was a good old.
I love Paul Harvey, yeah. Anyway, so that's where they are right now. They're around that mountain receiving the last bit of instructions from God.
But they had the two spies that told
Yes.
them it was safe.
It was Joshua and
They
Caleb.
wouldn't-
But they didn't listen to the two,
No,
did they?
no.
They listened to the other 10.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they paid a price for that. By the way, everyone died off in the wilderness except Joshua and Caleb.
Yeah.
And they were able to go into the Promised Land. And so anyway, that's interesting to see.
Yeah.
Okay. Meanwhile, we get back to our lesson here, because otherwise I'll get behind. So remember that the Israelites still at Mount Sinai. Soon they would be moving on. And so let's look at the first section. Now I do have some verses here. Who would like to read some of these verses? So you don't have to if you don't want to. But if somebody would like to help me out by reading a verse or two.
Sure.
You want to read one? Okay. You want a big one or a small one or a medium one?
I don't care. You give me one.
Well, I don't care either.
I'll accept it then, the big one.
Would you like to read? I don't want. I'll give you that one. How about you do that one for
I'm
me?
not great at,
What's that?
I'm not real great at reading out
Oh, that's okay. And by the way, use your own Bible or your own translation. This happens to be the New American Standard, I think. But we can use other translations besides that. It just happens to be the one I like to use, so that's why I printed it out. We're going to be looking at these verses here. And the first one is called faithfulness, that first point of our outline. And we'll be looking at blessings and looking at fellowship as well. But the first one is faithfulness, the verses 1 and 2 of chapter 26. And so let's look at that verse to begin with. And when we do, what I want you to do is I want you to see what commands you see. There should be, I think, 3 of them. So look for 3 different commands that might be in these particular verses. And I'm looking for my Bible commentary. Oh, it's over here a bit. I just hate it when I lose things like that. There it is. Okay. And who's got number 1?
I do.
Could you read that for us, Denise? Thank you.
You shall not make for yourselves idols, nor shall you set up for yourselves an image or a sacred pillar, nor shall you place a figured stone in your land to bow down to it. For I am the Lord your God. You shall keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary. I am the Lord.
Okay, pretty simple, right? Real simple one here. It's talking about you should be what?
Holy.
Well, holy is the general thing, but we should be
Faithful.
faithful. There you go. That's an aspect of being holy, right? Yeah. You were on the right track, Sharon. I'm not saying you weren't.
Oh, that's all right with me.
But he's reiterating some things, right? Because he talked about this already in the Ten Commandments that Steve read for us as well, right? So, is repetition good when you're teaching? Yes, it is. Now, some of us learned our multiplication tables when they were younger. Some of us learned better than others. It took me a long time. But memorization of those is key to learning it sometimes. And if you don't, you tend to what? Make mistakes. You know? So he's repeating this many, many times to make sure that they understand this, right? So what are some of the commands you see? There should be like 3 major ones, I think.
But even though he repeated it and repeated it, they still would.
Well, we know that. We're not getting to that part today.
It
you are correct.
just surprises me that.
I know, but you know what? They were human, and we fall sometimes.
Yeah.
But he's reiterating 3 main things here. The first one talks about idols, right?
Yeah.
And setting up an idol or a sacred pillar. These are all kind of things. And then bowing down to it, and you should, what about that? Not do it, right? So we're talking about, the first one would be, says, for I am the Lord your God, right? So that's kind of the first commandment, to realize there's only one God, and I'm your God. You are my people, I am your God. Does that apply to us as Christians today? Should, right? We are God's people as Christians, aren't we? We are members of the new covenant. They were under the old covenant at this point, but we're under the new covenant of Christ. So the first commandment is, to remember that I am the Lord. That's the first commandment. What would you think is the second one? And I'll give you hints. Verse 2, part of the first half of verse 2.
It's to observe his Sabbath, or
Okay.
observe his day.
Okay. So observe my Sabbaths. And it's just a plural there. And it talks about that. The second obligation that represented Israel's covenant commitment was related to Sabbath, the original holy day. Encouragement to honor the Sabbath would have included many other things, like other festivals, there's feasts, and there's special days. To remember aspects of what God did for them. They would have that Day of Atonement. They would have that day they celebrated leaving Egypt. It's called the Passover. There's a lot of those things that they were involved in. And so he's saying, this will help you to be holy living, like you said. If you remember that I am your Lord, and you remember that these Sabbaths are for a reason to remind you of that. Now the last one. What's the last one? I'll give you a hint. It's the middle part of verse 2.
Respect.
Respect what?
The Sabbath, the sanctuary.
Sanctuary. Now, when it says sanctuary, what specifically are we talking about? Now, this is something you weren't earlier, but in our other lessons, what were we talking about?
His
the building
tabernacle.
of the tabernacle, right? It was that temporary temple. Let's call it the temporary temple, because they were doing what?
They were moving place to place.
All around the wilderness, they'd be moving, right? And God knew they needed a center of worship, and that tabernacle was that.
How much did you say they had to, like 2,000 pounds or something that?
It weighed a tremendous amount because of all the gold and silver and bronze that was involved in the furnishings of the tabernacle. Yeah. I don't know the exact amount. No one knows the exact amount. There's some estimates. It was several tons. Yeah. So they had to pack that all up every time they moved. But every time they would follow the Lord and go through the different places on their wanderings, and they stopped, then they would set up that tabernacle. And they'd set up the tent of meeting around the tabernacle. And the people would camp around that tent of meeting. And then God's glory would come and fill the tabernacle. It's really a glorious thing. But it's a representation of what? God with them, right? He was showing that I am with you. So would it be important also to have reverence for that place?
Yes.
Yeah. So those are the commands. So if you remembered those commands, you would be on track. In other words, with obeying me, is what he's trying to say. So God's words were a warning against idols, along with a challenge to keep the Sabbath and to honor the tabernacle. Before laying out the blessings and possible discipline that God had for his people, and that's coming up, he first focused on people's attention on worship. So is that important for us, do you think? Is it important for us to get our heads right, focused on God? Of course it is, right? That makes only sense. When we come before the Lord, we should come come with an uncluttered mind, uncluttered life as much as possible. We should be ready to receive whatever instructions he's given us, to thank him for what he's done for all the aspects of worship it might be, right? The public reading of scripture, prayer, praising God through song, right? All these things are part of worship. So we need to do the same thing. We need to focus on God in a similar fashion. So ask the question here, how does the way we worship God affect other areas of our relationship with him? How does the way we worship God, does it seem to affect other areas of our relationship with him? What do you think about that question? I wish we had real-time live audio. The folks at home who are watching right now, because I know they're saying, I got it.
Yeah.
But it does, though. It does affect us, doesn't it? Profoundly, how we worship. And if we're not in tune with God, if our hearts are not with God, our relationship will be strained. There's a verse in the New Testament that talks about how your prayers have become hindered because of your sin. And that happens in our life when we commit a sin, perhaps we lied or something like that. Does that help our relationship or hurt our relationship with God? It hurts. Right. It becomes a stumbling block, if you will, to that worship. And when we have these things in our life that are not resolved first, and that's what it's talking about. So it refers here also to our plan here, that Newton's third law.
What? Oh, Newton.
Newton was a early scientist, not Fig Newton, Sir Isaac Newton. But he had certain laws that he figured out as a scientist, and one of them is called the third law of motion. And it states, you may have heard this before, for every action in nature, there is an equal and opposite reaction. And have you ever seen, I forgot what it's called now. It's called Newton's something. But anyway, it has these steel balls, usually about 4 of them at least, and they're hanging from strings, right? And they're on this little apparatus. You take the one on the end and you let it go. What does it do? Bam! It hits the next one, which then hits the next one, which then hits the next one, which hits the last one. So you go, bam! It goes out here. Bam! It goes out here. It's really cool. I love that whole thing. But that's an illustration of that. With that action, there's another opposite reaction. So for the Israelites, faithfully obeying God's law was an action, right? And it would bring about what, hopefully, on the other side with them, a correspondingly favorable spiritual reaction. So they're bringing that corollary here, if you will. So, any comments or questions about that? I don't mean to go too fast or anything. Kind of interesting, though. Do these apply to us? Sure it does. We don't have a tabernacle, but we have a place we worship, right?
This is God's house, and over here.
Yeah. Now, does that mean it's any holier than any other building? No. No. God is with us as Christians. His Holy Spirit indwells us. So when we come together, God is with us. The church is, of course, the people. This is just a building that we meet in.
Right.
Yeah. But this is kind of a similar idea, if you want to call it that, right? And we need to remember, of course, God needs to be worshipped and revered, just like they were talking about here as well. And we don't worship on the quote Sabbath, the seventh day. We worship, on the seventh. We worship on the first day, which is called the Lord's Day. And the early church did that as well. They used to worship on the Sabbath, the early Christians, but they got kicked out of the synagogue because the Jews didn't want them in there anymore. Yeah. And so they began worshiping on the day that Christ rose. He is the new creation. And so that's why we worship on Sunday, the first day of the week, because we're worshiping that new creation. The Sabbath was set up because of the original creation, when on the seventh day God rested from his labors of creation. And that's what they were revering. They were revering, it's hard to say that word, the creative action of God. We are revering his Son coming to save us from our sins. So that's what, it's in case some people would be equivalent and say, well, you're not really worshiping the Sabbath. No, we're worshiping the Lord's Day. And the early Christians did that. It says so in the Bible they did. So
Christ came to fulfill those laws.
So should we keep that day as much as we can for the Lord as well? Of course we should. And Paul even goes further. He says some people will revere one day, and some people revere another day. Whatever you do, do it holy for the Lord, it says. And so that's the philosophy that most Christians adhere to. So let's look at our next point. The next point is the big one. I think Sharon's got that one. You've got number 2, right?
Yes.
So we're going to look at this one, and this is called blessings. We talked about faithfulness, now we're going to talk about blessings. And this is in Leviticus 26, verses 3 through 8. Verses 3 through 8. For these next 6 verses, I want you to listen for God's I will statement and his you will statements that we see there. And matter of fact, I have a few of them listed here so we can talk about them. I don't know if we'll write them in or not. We'll maybe talk about them. But let's look at these verses here and be thinking again about these statements as they come up. Go ahead and read that for us, Sharon.
If you walk in my statutes and keep my commandments so as to carry them out, then I shall give you rains in their season so that the land will yield its produce, and the trees of the field will bear their fruit. Indeed, your threshing will last you until grape gathering, and grape gathering will last you until sowing. You will thus eat your food to the full and live securely in your land. I shall also grant peace in the land so that you may lie down with no one making you tremble. I shall also eliminate harmful beasts from the land, and no sword will pass through your land. But you will chase your enemies, and they will fall before you by the sword. 5 of you will chase 100, and 100 of you will chase 10,000, and your enemies will fall before you by the sword.
So we see here, he's talking about, if you follow these commands that I talked about, these first few verses, right? If you follow me, he's telling these people in Israel, in the desert right now, at Mount Sinai, he's saying, if you do these things, what's going to happen? Now we got I will statements, yes, and you will statements, and it will. Just sort of thinking about that as we look at these. What were you going to say? Yeah, I cut you off. I didn't mean to.
That they would have plenty to eat. Oh, and they would have peace in their land.
Yeah. So I will give you peace. I will give you the crops. Right. Let's just take a look at these verses. It says, "Then I will give you rain in their season." Now, again, remember, the Israelites were not an industrialized nation like we think of nations, right? They were what we call an agrarian nation, agriculture-based. So would rain be important?
Yeah.
Oh boy, yeah, it would be. Now rain came at 2 different times. It would come in the spring, there's a spring rain, and there's an autumn rainy season. And so it was important that they had both of those for the kind of crops they grew. Otherwise, you'd be hungry. You might starve. So that would be a big thing. So God is promising them, I'm going to take care of you, even in these areas of sustenance. In other words, what you're going to have. It says, I'm going to give you the rains in their seasons. Okay, and why? Because then the land will produce its produce, and trees will bear the fruit. So he's saying that I will do those things for you, right?
Some of the translations say, you shall. Mm-hmm. And in my thinking, shall gives a more of a
command.
Yeah, yeah, shall. You shall. Ooh, gosh.
You got it. You shall take care of the phone.
Yes.
But you shall is what we're talking about. You will. Okay.
Take this one.
No problem. So we're talking about also grape gatherings, right? Vineyards were very important to them, and all these things. Says thus you will eat your food in full and live securely in your land. So they didn't have refrigerators. They didn't have ways to store food, right? They didn't have canning, things like that, like we have today. They had ways to store small amounts of food for short periods of time. But after that, if you didn't have the food for that year already in the storage spots, you were going to be hungry. And they couldn't go down to the Safeway store and buy food like we are, right? So he's going to be giving them peace on that sense. Is it a peaceful thing to know that you don't have to worry about where you're going to eat your next meal? Oh, big time, right? Big time. I remember when I was younger, my dad was out of work for over a year. He used to work for Boeing, and Boeing laid him off. You know, we're talking about layoffs today, right? but Boyne laid him off. And he was hoping to get back on, and we were on food stamps. The church would bring us food baskets once in a while. It was kind of a tough time for a young teenage boy like me to know that, oh boy, people have to help me. But I was grateful, but at the same time I was embarrassed. But it's a difficult thing to go through. God is saying, don't worry. If you are following me, I'm going to bless you, right? What else is he going to bless us in besides that? Last part of verse 5 says, live securely in your land, right? And then verse 6 picks it up again. What is he going to do for them? He's going to give them peace, it says. Peace. Now, the word peace here is an interesting word. It has to do with the word shalom. And shalom is meaning more than just absence of war. It can also mean that you are flourishing as a person. You are having peace in your life. Does that make sense? You're having your family is successful. You have children. All those kind of things that go with what would be considered a peaceful life. And that's what it's referring to when it says that kind of word, shalom. So is that a good thing? Does that address the core of those people? Yeah. I would like that in my life, right? All of us would. Sometimes the things we go through, the suffering we go through is our own fault. Other times it's not our own fault, right? And he's saying here, God is promising them, if you follow this covenant I have with you, and you make me your God, and you reverence my day, and you reverence my sanctuary, I'm going to see that you have that peace. Is that a good thing? Oh, it's a great thing, isn't it? Boy, that'd be a wonderful thing. And he also goes on to says that you're going to have peace when you lie down, and no one will make you tremble. Wow, that's neat. We have things in our world today that we might be worried about. Worried about Russia or China or something like that, right? Or some terrorist organization. So there's things that can sometimes ruin our sleep if we let them, right? But God is promising them here this peace. Now we also have a peace that passes all understanding. When in the New Testament it talks about that, what kind of peace is it referring to there? Is it actually peace, meaning no war necessarily, in the physical sense? It's talking about the inward sense, isn't it? Yeah. With the Lord, with your Lord, you have that peace that He comforts you in all those things. So you can go through those difficult times with that peace that He gives us. It says that also I will eliminate the harmful beasts from the land, and no sword will pass through it. Would that be a good thing for an agrarian culture also, to realize that God's going to protect your flock from, wolves or whatever it might be? He's saying, right? He's going to give you peace in that sense as word, that He's going to save your flocks from those things. He's also saying no sword will pass through your land. That's an army going through. An army that does what? Destroys things, kills people, right? And He will give you peace on that case too. Now this is all contingent on them remembering to do these other things. Did they always do those other things? I think Sharon brought this up already. Did they always do those things? No, they forgot, didn't they? They forgot their Lord. And that's to their detriment, but we have the advantage of hindsight. We can see what they went through and say to ourselves, I want to avoid that. I don't want to fall in those pitfalls. I'm going to revere the Lord like I should, perhaps, right? Anyway, it says, I will eliminate the harmful beasts, no sword will pass through them, but you will chase your enemies, and they will fall before you by the sword. And if you look in the accounts in the Old Testament, when God relented and forgave them their sins and raised up a judge to save them from whatever the situation was, I'm trying to think of that one guy, one judge that had the 300 men. Anyway, he was able to, with just 300 men, the whole Philistine army was able to defeat them. And he did that because God was on his side. But anyway, it says, but you will chase your enemies, and they will fall before you by the sword. 5 of you will chase 100, and 100 will chase 10,000, and your enemies will fall before you by the sword. Wow, is that a great promise? That's a great promise, and I wish I could remember that guy's name. One of the judges. He doubted the Lord at first quite a bit, and he had to have the fleece. Remember that? what was his name? Now I'm going to really be irritated because I can't remember it. It's not coming to me, and I don't see it right here. But he was one of the judges, and he was very hesitant to be a judge. But God used him anyway, didn't he? Don't remember his name. That's just terrible. Well, let's go on here. Let me see. In this section here, it talks about the rain. I forgot to mention this specific thing, but he focuses on two main areas, and one of them was precipitation, which brought about the harvest, right? And the other one was peace, which we talked about generally already. These two things, they brought about their prosperity as a nation. They were very prosperous, and it also brought about God's presence with the peace he was talking about there. So is that a good thing also for us in our lives today, to know we have the fact that we're rich in the Lord, maybe not monetarily in our bank account, but he gives us what we need, right? And he gives us those other things in life that are intangible sometimes, but he also gives us his presence. And we have his presence, we have a lot, don't we? And so that's what he's promising them as well. Any comments about this big section here? By the way, we saw that happening during several of the wars that Israel had in modern day. The Yom Kippur War and the 6-Day War and things like this, where they had these big armies coming against Israel, and there would be large numbers of people, and a small force of Israelis would go against them, and they would just run in front of them. It was an amazing thing to see. And this comes right from this promise, I believe. I believe it does. So the word follow in verse 3, you kind of talked really briefly about that. If you walk in my statutes or follow my statutes, it basically doesn't mean just like somebody following something. It means to live in, to be immersed in me. When you're in worship at a time when you realize that God's really active in your life, do you feel immersed in that, in the holiness of God? We do, don't we? And that's what it's talking about, being fully in with God. I'll make sure I didn't miss something. We talked about an abundance of food, and we're going to touch on that here in a moment again in our last part here. The word shalom, I mentioned it already. It means more than absence of conflict. It emphasizes a holistic calm. Now, holistic is one of those New Age terms, but it just means the whole of you. The whole of you is what it's talking about. All that makes you, you. You have this holistic calm from God that envelops your entire life. It says practically the security could include the absence of dangerous animals, like we talked about, or the absence of an enemy that's going to destroy you, which we also talked about that as well. Now, Israel would soon break this covenant, and we would see that God would have to punish them. But what did he always do? He listened to their cries, and he came back, and he preserved them. He brought back, because he did not desert his people. He sometimes had to punish his people, but he did not desert them. We, as Christians, have that in our own lives. We have that security that God is our Father, that he's not going to throw us aside. We are his Father. Now, sometimes do we turn from our Father and try to do other things? Sure we do. But he always brings us back to him. Sometimes we have to go through a time of testing then, when that happens. So, God still blesses obedience even today. But we must be careful that we are serving him for the right reasons. We're not doing it because we're checking a box. In other words, we're doing it because we love him, right? It's like in a family. It's just like a family, actually, where they have each person in the family has mutual love for the other, and that's the kind of thing that we have. So another question is, how do we ensure that we are worshiping God for who he is instead of just seeking his blessings? What do you think about that question? Because that is a good question. How do we ensure that? Can we ensure that, first of all, do you think? I think we can. I think it's not easy sometimes, because that's one of these intangibles. What does it mean? When I say the word intangible, what do I mean? A tangible thing is like a solid thing you can grab a hold of. Intangible is not something you can grab a hold of necessarily, but it's something it's a feel that you know you have. When we know God is with us, when He's protecting us, when He's giving us that calm in a storm, we understand that at that point there, He is blessing us in that way as well. And that's what we're talking about here. So we see that God, time after time, repeated this mercy towards Israel. What does that tell us? Does God do the same for us? Sure does. Time after time. I can think of time after time when I've realized what I've done was something that was selfish or something that was wrong. And when I ask for His forgiveness, He's ready to forgive all the time. And that's what we're talking about in these verses. Israel's being taught this, and we, the same way in our world today, the same kind of thing. So God still blesses obedience today. So we got to make sure we have the right reasons in our heart as well. And that's what it's talking about. So the Lord promised to provide agricultural blessings and security. But that wasn't all. God had even more blessings to share with His people if they would obey Him. And we're going to look at our last point. Steve, I think you've got this one here. These last 5 verses, I want you to notice the additional blessings from God that you see here. So we're in Leviticus 26, verses 9 through 13. Can you go ahead and read that for us? I think it's yours.
Yeah, I had to reboot my
Oh.
phone here, so. I will look on you with favor and make you fruitful and increase your numbers, and I will keep my covenant with you. You will still be eating last year's harvest when you will have to move out to make room for the new. I will put my dwelling place among you, and I will not abhor you. I will walk among you and be your God, and you will be my people. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt so that you would no longer be slaves to the Egyptians. I broke the bars of your yoke and enabled you to walk with heads held high.
Some very interesting verses here for people who were enslaved just previous to this, right? Remember, they were in Egypt, and they had to do what the taskmaster said, and they were not nice people to them. Originally, when Israel was there, they were the guests of Egypt. But after many years go by, a new Pharaoh arises who doesn't remember what they did for him. Because remember, Israel helped Egypt when they first initially came there during a time of famine. So they forgot that. And they were giving them all these different tasks. And so they would, this imagery here, it says that you will, in my particular translations, that I broke the bars of your yoke and made you walk erect. So you have this person that's bent over with a heavy burden on their back, walking with probably chains on or something like that, because they're enslaved, right? And so the picture is that God took you in that situation and He freed you from it. Freed you from it. So he again talks about some of these additional blessings here. So when he says, so I will turn toward you. Now that's neat. God is turning His face towards those people. Think about that. Isn't that a neat thing? That God was facing them, looking at them. God looks at us too. He says, and I will make you fruitful and multiply you, and I will confirm my covenant or agreement with you. I don't know, in your translation, did it say covenant there, Steve, in the first verse, 9?
Yeah, my covenant with you.
So that agreement, in other words, I'm going to reiterate the agreement that I have with you. I'm going to remind you about it and let you know I remember it as well. And not only that, I want to bless you in a way that is profound. For them as a small group of people, do you think it was important to be fruitful, multiply, become stronger? Yeah. Especially, like I said, in this society, it was an agrarian society. They needed people to bring the crops in. They needed people to tend the flocks. They needed their families to be large families. So this was a sign that God knew that and was going to give them the best for that. And confirm their covenant. Now, I like this one in verse 10 that you read. Your translation is pretty good too. I'm going to read it in the New American as well. It says, you will eat the old supply and clear out the old because of the new. In other words, they're going to be blessed with so much harvest, which is important to them. Remember, agriculture is very important to them. Normally you would have to eat sparingly before the new crops came in because you're running out of the old harvest that was stored. But he says, no. When my blessings come, they're going to be filling over the sack, essentially. It says, you're still going to have old supply when you got to put in the new harvest somewhere, and you don't have room. Isn't that exciting? In the New Testament, it talks about the blessings that God gives us. they're like in a sack that's been stuffed down, more poured on it, shaken. And the blessings are so much that they come out of the sack and they fall onto the floor. And that's the same kind of imagery here. You think that would be important to the Israelites? Sure would be, right? So what would be an equivalent for us today, do you think, for that?
Pantry's full.
What's that?
The pantry is full.
Yeah, the pantry's full. I don't have room to put this extra can of soup now. It's got to sit on the counter, you know? Maybe not just food. It could be your bank account. Well, I'm not running out of money at the end of the month. I have extra money. I can actually put some in the savings now or something, you know? It's like, wow, God's blessed me this way, you know? I didn't get any increases in pay, but some reason God's allowed me to save that money or whatever it is. It could be things like that as well. And that would be an exciting thing for these people. It says, moreover, I will make my dwelling among you, and my soul will not reject you. Wow, think about that. He will never leave you. He will never depart from you. Do we have that as Christians, that assurance as well? We sure do, don't we? It's a doctrine called the doctrine of eternal security. We are eternally secure. He has us in his hand, and he's not going to let us go. Even at those times when maybe we want to turn our back on him, he still has us, if we're Christians, right? He has us in his hand. He's protecting us, keeping us safe. And then when we come back to him, we realize he never left us. He never left us or forsook us. You doing okay over there?
Yeah, I just lost my pump, lost the communications.
He's got diabetic thing that he has to monitor.
I've got a glucose sensor.
Yeah, I got one here,
Yeah.
but between the two apps on this thing and this thing lost brain cell.
Uh-oh.
It's brain wandered off. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Go find it.
They rang the bell on, so we've got to stop here. But this interesting verse I want to touch on says, moreover, I will make my dwelling among you. Like I said, what does that word dwelling mean? It's actually the same word that's rendered tabernacle. Remember the tabernacle? That was the presence of God, right, in the wilderness. What about us today? God dwells us in our bodies. We are the temple of God, right?
We're his
Holy
tabernacle.
Spirit. What's that?
We're his tabernacle.
That's right. The Spirit of God indwells us, and we are that tabernacle. So that's a great thing. So does that indicate intimacy between God and his people here? Yeah.
I
Same
think
thing
the
for
way
us.
this thing reads
Mm-hmm.
is that God is saying, I will turn to you,
Right.
I will make you, and I will do that. But on the other end, you have to do, and this is,
Yes.
you will receive these blessings.
Yeah. And it will be a blessing to you. Yes, exactly. I love this terminology also. I will also walk among you and be your God, and you shall be my people. What does that bring us to mind? Does that visualize
Very close friendship.
very close friendship? How about, remember in Genesis, Adam and Eve?
Yeah.
God would walk along with Adam and Eve in the cool of the evening, it was said. And there was another man, Enoch in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
He walked and he talked with the Lord.
Yeah.
And then he was not,
No.
because God took him home. He didn't die. He was taken away. Anyway, so that's that close walking. He says, I promise you this, you follow these things, I will be your God, and I will walk with you, you will be my people. I will dwell with you. He says, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Again, he's reminding them, this is who I am. I am the all-powerful God who destroyed this superpower called Egypt. He says, there were nothing considering me, right? It says that you would not be their slaves, and I broke the bars of your yoke and made you walk erect, or not with your back bowed anymore, and slave free. So this is interesting because this last verse especially reminds us how Israel, how God freed them from the bondage, the yoke of slavery in Egypt. And this, I think, is also foreshadowing. What does Messiah do? What does Jesus do for us? Frees us from the yoke of sin, right? He breaks the bondage of sin. And so this is, I think, one of these verses that point towards when Messiah comes, because he's going to go back to it. So God's presence plays a big role in our experiencing blessings, but ours response as well to God, right? It's that vertical thing with God that we talked about before. Let's close, because they rang the bell on us, and I always go late. Shame on me, bad teacher. Let's look at these three main points we talked about. First one is that God desires wholehearted devotion. Okay. The second one is that God blesses those who faithfully observe his commandments, and he doesn't forget us either, by the way. And the third one is God sent Jesus so we might break free of sin's chains and live in relationship with him. And that's the key part there, right? So we want to remember our main verse we've been talking about, which is Leviticus 11:45. It says, For I am the Lord who brought you up to the land of Egypt to be your God. So you must be holy because I am holy. And I think we should strive to do that. There's a big word called sanctification. You might have heard that word before. All that means is striving to be holy as he is holy. Doing those things that pleases God. We should be about God's business of doing those kind of things. We need to remember God's call to be holy, because it brings us that intimate relationship with him, doesn't it? We need to also examine our own lives. Are there perhaps other gods with a little g that we have set up in our own lives? Things that take priority over God. Maybe we should remember that God, there's only one God. There's not these other ones, right? These things that take us away from worship him, they should not be hindering our worship with God. So think about what actions can you take maybe to remove those things from your lives. They can take many forms. They can be sports, right? They can be, other activities of some sort. But things like that sometimes have a tendency to displace God in our lives, and make sure it doesn't hinder our relationship. I think it's a great lesson to finish on. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Any comments or questions in general before we close? In a word of prayer? Did you guys enjoy the lesson too? I hope you learned some.
Yes, thank you.
I hope you learned something about what it means to be holy. We kind of touched on that as well. Let's have a word of prayer and we'll be dismissed. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for how you love us and how you care for us. And Lord, we strive to be holy, Lord, as you are holy. And we want to live in that close relationship with you. We want to tabernacle with you. We want to dwell with you. We want to walk with you and talk with you in our lives, Lord. Help us to do that so we can receive those kind of blessings in our lives as well and be a blessing to others. And help us to share that with others, share your love with others too. Lord, I just thank you and I just pray that you'd help us as we live in our lives, Lord, to obey your commandments. In your Son's precious name, amen. Well, thank you all for being here online as well as here in the classroom. Again, my name is Norm Ellis. This is Grace Baptist Church Adult 1 Bible Study. And stand by online because Pastor Matthew will be up in the next hour. I think if you go to the same YouTube channel, you'll be able to find a link that goes to that as well. And I just pray you have a great day. Thanks for being with us here as well. Let me get offline here.